The survey NYU did. The hire managers' top 3 values that they are seeking in new hires is number 1, achievement, number 2, learning, and 3, a strong desire to work. Only 2% of the 45,000 Gen Z that were surveyed identified with those values.
It is what I hear from employers in terms of the challenges they're facing when they bring in new Gen Z employees. But I think it's a little bit unfair to say that they're unemployable or even unprepared. They really like to feel prepared. They like to feel confident and knowing that this is a person stepping into one of their first professional roles and building that structure in, that foundation. And I think that would be very helpful to them.
You have to put yourself in their shoes. As you're getting someone who's young, if you have an intentional culture and you have a great training program, onboarding program, mentoring, all those things, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, whether it's hybrid, if you're intentional about those things, you can still shape a Gen Z person to be an incredible asset to you and your team.
It's learning to embrace you for all those wonderful qualities. Damn it, I'm not an obstacle. I'm an opportunity.
Strong companies, lasting partnerships, powerful events. Welcome to the Experience Builders podcast.
Chris, we just spent a solid 20 minutes working on some technical issues, and we definitely could have employed somebody Gen Z. So we've almost answered our own question here.
I think it's karma, Khalil. If we're sitting here questioning Gen Z's ability to integrate into the workforce, I'm not so sure they weren't listening and sent gremlins into the nest of wires that you can't see off camera on my desk right now. So,
yeah. Well, and you've brought in Jaynie for us for this topic.
I did. I knew if we were going to talk. So the goal today and our topic in this week's episode of Experience Builders podcast is Gen Z Unemployable, which is kind of a poke the bear title. But there's some new data and surveys out that really prove the disconnect between hiring managers right now in that demographic of workforce. But Jaynie's one of the people I've known by reputation for a couple of decades. Jaynie Ellison, who is our guest and the current founder and president of Emerge XP, which is a fairly new entry into the HR and recruiting and talent placement part of the business. She's really made her mark in our industry with her previous company. And so I just knew we needed somebody smarter than us to talk about how this large talent pool is being, first of all, sought and recruited, and then, placed with employers. And who better than Jaynie to know what are the challenges that current employers are speaking of, and if there's any suggestions about how these groups can better integrate. I thought Jaynie would be a terrific person to have. So she's a friend and doing me a favor. She's also, spoiler alert, we've been looking for EDPA listeners. We've been trying to get a Florida chapter launched. We've had a fair amount of volunteers or people willing to participate. We needed a leader, and Jaynie just stepped up and agreed to become the president of the new EDPA Florida chapter. So super thrilled. Of course, she waits till like a month before I finish as EDPA president national to go. Now it's safe. Now it's safe to go into the water. But thank you for that, Jaynie, and thanks for joining us today on the call.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I don't know about smarter, but it's certainly a conversation that I've had a lot over probably the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so I'm happy to participate in this conversation and add any insight that I've gleaned from those conversations with candidates as well as employers in the industry. What? And as far as the Florida EDPA chapter, super excited. I couldn't be happier.
Outstanding. Well, thank you. Thank you again. I'm going to set the table, if it's okay, Cleo, what brought this is a conversation that's been happening, as Jaynie said, often and everywhere. And, as I'm a person who's raising 2 Gen Zers to and hopefully preparing them to, as they finish college, to launch into the professional workforce. I know what the differences are between my mindset as an employer and the two young ladies in my house that are looking for employment. But for the first time, I've actually now seen a poll and some survey results that have come out. September 24th, there was a Wall Street Journal essay published by an author named Susie Welch, who's also runs the most popular course at NYU, which is the book title is called Becoming You, but the course is really on preparing Gen Z for the workforce. And then she was a guest on a broader conversation October 6th on CNN that Michael Smerconic did on the same subject. So when I say, is Gen Z unemployable, I don't really think that's the case, but here's what the facts now bear. The survey NYU did, 45,000 Gen Z young professionals were interviewed. 2,500 hiring managers were interviewed. And in a nutshell, the hire managers' top 3 values that they are seeking in new hires is number 1, achievement, number 2, learning, and a desire to learn, and 3, a strong desire to work. Overwhelmingly, those were the top 3 of the 2,500 hiring managers surveyed. Only 2% of the 45,000 Gen Zers that were surveyed identified with those values. Their top 3 in this order was number 1, self-care, number 2, authenticity, and number 3 was the desire to help others. So I think what I found really concerning, if that's the right word, that's a 98% disconnect rate with this huge population. And there's really great data. This isn't, a poll group of 100 people. There's a lot of people. And so I thought we could unpack a conversation about that mismatch. And really, I think Jaynie would agree, or let me ask you, Jay, do you agree? The rap on Gen Z as a workforce is they're ill-prepared or they're unwilling to adapt. According to the survey, 1 in 6 bosses express a reluctance to hire new or recent graduates because of this disconnect. And 75% of employers that have hired Gen Zers claim that they're unsatisfactory because their expectations tend to lean in these other ways. What say you, Jen? Is this consistent with what you hear when you're talking to employers, Jaynie?
It is what I hear from employers in terms of the challenges they're facing when they bring in new Gen Z employees. But I think it's a little bit unfair to say that they're unemployable or even unprepared, because I don't know that training, there's really been a runway or something to support what they need to be prepared once they show up for day one, right?
Does that mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, does that mean schools are failing them in preparing them, do you think?
I think it's a blend, honestly. I think there is not as much practical experience moving into the workplace or transitioning from, higher education into the workplace or whatever training program that may be, depending on position. Also, coming into the workplace, I don't know if we have kept up with the digital fluency of this generation, because as we noted coming in, they definitely have that aptitude, and that experience comes really second nature to them. I don't think that maybe we've kept up in that way in providing kind of a foundation for them. But I think these things are solvable, especially in our industry.
You bring up some great points, because when we wrap up here a little bit, I thought we could maybe run through what are the suggestions we might have for both the young employees and the employers about how to close that gap and integrate. But to your point about, are they prepared? One of the things Professor Welch was talking about was in her class, which is now the most popular business course at NYU. She said, the subjects of her courses are titled Purpose in Flourishing. And she said, we're now talking to them about basic workplace etiquette, and including things like how to accept a meeting request from a colleague or a coworker, or really how to prepare for a lunch with a senior director. These are things I don't know that anybody prepared me formally for that. I don't even know when I figured it out. I kind of do remember in my 20s when I worked, in the financial district and the Boston Stock Exchange, they were morning breakfasts and role playing with some of the senior VPs as they were preparing, those young impressionable minds like us worked in the prospectus literature stuffing department. Occasionally we were on the phones. So, and I think I just shut up and listened is more what it was. Or you looked at people that were more well-known and sort of mirrored whatever they did. I do know that there is a protocol and an etiquette if I were preparing young people. And I like the idea that schools might be talking about those kinds of things, amongst other things. So I don't know if you're aware of, and maybe that's how we help close the gap, Jaynie, is should employers be prepared to, in the onboarding, don't assume some of those skills exist. Maybe we need to think about whether it's through mentors or just formal structured, weekly sessions, helping that group integrate to professional life. Does that make sense?
It does. And again, I think that there is a blend here of creating a mentorship program, of creating that pathway. Setting an expectation is also something that I think would be helpful to Gen Z coming in the door, right? They really like to feel prepared. They like to feel confident, and building that foundation of what to expect, knowing that this is a person stepping into one of their first professional roles, and building that structure and that foundation. And I think that would be very helpful to them. I also, thinking back, to my early days as a professional, and even before that, there were things built into curriculum, even at a high school level, that were different than I think what this generation has experienced in an educational setting.
Yeah.
So what we would not even really necessarily think twice about, because it was such a part of curriculum, it was such a part of instruction and even socialization for our generation, right? I don't think that the same layers were present for Gen Z. And so that support is needed going into the workplace. I love that there is a class
Yeah.
that is addressing this before these young professionals are stepping into that first position. I think that's huge and a smart layer to the curriculum.
Such a big conversation in our industry when we talk about future workforce is the trade skills, right? And those jobs. Khalil, you're a consultant and advisor for a lot of small businesses that tend to lean. I feel like a lot of what we've talked about up to now has been for the office jobs in that environment. But you're working with construction contractors, landscape contractors, pool, home remodel, all that stuff. Does this disconnect? I mean, is there any of this that's applying on that side of the workforce that you're seeing or hearing about?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we see with this demographic, and again, it's definitely more trades related. They see that the trades, a lot of them are the ones that are going into trades are seeing it as a big opportunity financially, because there's such a demand for the trades now, where you can go to a technology center and be making six figures after a couple of years, because there's such a demand for plumbers and HVAC technicians and et cetera, et cetera. Because of that, we're noticing that those ones are highly incentivized. And so if you can find ways to have good incentives in place, they'll work tirelessly for those incentives. But if you don't have those in place, it's going to be really easy to get the ones that are just going to be on their phone all day, that are just going to be, disconnected from the team, from the work. But if you can put the incentives in place in a very clear way, where they can kind of control their, what their output, and they can easily equate it to a reward, then they work really, really well.
Does the reward need to be financial? Look, it's funny. So when we looked at the top 15 things that Gen Z said that they most frequently talked about what they value, number 4 was wealth, affluence, and financial security. Does it always need to be about? I mean, look, we all are motivated by money. Is money the only thing to incentivize, or is there something else you're thinking?
Well, and I'll let Jaynie speak to it too, but in specifically the trades, money is a big one. I think another aspect of it is that they want to be able to somewhat control their schedule. They want to have some flexibility on time, and that doesn't necessarily just mean like, I want to work my hours. It also means like, hey, if I want to work more on the weekend, like schedule me for the weekend. And in the trade specifically, again, this isn't really an office setting, but they don't want to necessarily be held back by like what your schedule is. Like they want to get after it. So that's not everyone across the board. Obviously, we're talking about, the people that we are hoping to hire that are doing a good job.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing is if you have incentives in place, specifically pay for performance is one that we talk about a lot, where essentially as an owner, you assign labor as a budget. Hey, you finish the job, this is how much you get, rather than going off an hourly basis. And they see that number, they're going to want to stack as many of those jobs as possible. And so they'll work later to get more jobs done because they know exactly what they're going to make. So that's just one thing. I'd be curious, Jaynie, what you see, not just from trades, but also from in-office positions for the Gen Z.
I think for in-office and even for trades within our industry, because that is a layer of the talent in our industry as well, I would say flexibility is probably at the top of that wish list for Gen Z or early career, as well as culture. Culture is huge. And there's almost like a refusal to be in a workplace for any amount of time that has a negative or what Gen Z considers to be a toxic culture. They just, there will be a high rate of turnover if they perceive that. So those two things I think are huge. In terms of incentivizing, I think maybe laying out specifically within the exhibit industry or in office positions, the opportunities to travel, participating in events such as, the networking events that we often have at shows, EDPA Access, and then at exhibit, or just for example, like Chapters Collide. And there are other organizations, of course, within and throughout our industry that offer those opportunities, but feeling connected and feeling part of something larger than themselves, connecting with that group and giving back, participating in associations. So companies that do offer their team members the opportunity to be part of industry-specific organizations, I think that that's huge in, retaining them if that support is there.
That's a great point. So you mentioned travel.
It is.
Post-pandemic, we really realized that we were in a deeply wounded situation with our workforce, right? 2.8 million had been laid off, 300,000 didn't come back. We already had an aging problem. The young generation never heard of us as a viable career path. So we started hitting the circuit to try and shine a light on what is, arguably the largest invisible industry. And I remember we did a career fair at Williamson College of the Trades outside of Philadelphia. I was with Glenn Zeal, the president of Genesis Exhibits, and David Holloway, the president of Eagle Management. Shout out to Eagle and Genesis. And we were talking to these young men who were, 80 exhibitors, and they're walking around, and they were drawn to the travel, Jaynie. The idea that events take place everywhere, that you might be sent to go to work on or supervise a project on somebody else's dime, that was a huge perk in attraction. And we're now exhibiting, this is now 3 or 4 years later, EDPA is exhibiting at 17 events a year, trying to raise our exposure with that young generation. And the message now is there is treasure in the trades. And one of the treasures is travel, right? It's not just it's not just a great income. So yeah. But to Khalil's point, we've got to create an incentive. Here's a question I have, Khalil, that my experience is, I mean, we talked about this off camera. When I was Gen Z's age, now in the workforce, I kind of went into every job. I don't know where I learned it, but I was told you should approach a job with a 3 to 5 year time frame of keeping that job. Employers will be willing to invest in you, train you, pour into you, and they'll feel it's safe to do that. I look at resumes now of a lot of young people, and it's 9 to 15 months, and there's 6 jobs on their resume, and that's a risk. And so you go, and they want what they want when they want it, and that's now. And so there seems to be a disconnect of the concept of delayed gratification, meaning you don't get paid top dollar right away until you got some experience. How do we bridge that gap with this group?
I think you have to put yourself in their shoes. I mean, you think about it. For a lot of Gen Z, they were either in high school or college during COVID, where everything got ripped out from underneath them, where they were playing sports and the season was canceled, and they were hoping to graduate, and then they stopped going to classes and they did a virtual graduation. And then they go into classes for a couple of years in college, and they're, just Zoom meetings. And then, all of a sudden interest rates were so low, now they're so high. You think about just AI and how that's changing everything for them. And they're being told that they're not going to be able to afford a house, and they're being told that they're not going to be able to have a job because AI is going to take it. I mean,
listen, bro, if this is your version of a pep talk, I think we feel like we're going to need to work on your bedside manner a little.
Probably so, but I mean, that's the reality of what's being
right,
pumped at them all day, every day on social media. I think if you consider that, you can see why someone might not, hold out for. Maybe it'll get better at this position. If they're not figuring it out right away, they're like, okay, let's move on. Also, you can see why they want to make so much money. It's because there's this fear that there's not going to have enough. And I think on the flip side of that, some of them might even say like, hey, it is what it is right now. I just want to find the best situation I can be in. And I'm not too, different personalities do different things, but the ones that are motivated by money, they're going to want to figure that out as quickly as possible. They're not thinking long-term. They're thinking, what can I do now to make it now? The ones that are, kind of given up on those American dreams, they maybe are like, well, where can I find the best culture and the most flexibility now? Because that's the only thing that matters today.
The light bulb just went off for me on something you said. And that is because I think about all these young people I've interviewed in the last year. One of the top questions is, can I work remotely? Right? Is there a flexible work schedule? And I'm like, what is it with that? And then, but just listening to what you just said, Khalil, your school was interrupted and you ended up doing it remotely. The technology just exploded. Zoom and Teams and all these virtual, technology in other areas is exploding. This is just normal for them. So, we fondly remember the days of when everybody showed up and culture mattered based on the FaceTime you had with people at work. But most of the young folks we're talking about maybe weren't in the workforce then, and so they don't have that point of reference. So I have to admit, I've come a long way at being more accepting about some jobs being remote. We used to call it a traveling salesman. I always knew those guys, could work from home, but there's so many more positions now that it's now acceptable, and I'm accepting of that. But no, that's a great point. And Jaynie and I have been talking about our growth plan for next year, and she's coaching us up on how to prepare. And a couple of things I'm like, yeah, that's not a remote. I want that person here. And she goes, well, you really need to think about maybe that at least it's flex. Do they really need to be in the office every day? And if this is what it's going to take for us to land better quality young people, I have to revisit my thinking. And as an owner, as an employer, and I totally get that. So, So damn you, Jaynie, damn you.
And I think part of the immediacy is that, like, this generation really wants to see results. They want to see that they're progressing in their career. They want to see that earning potential more quickly. Like maybe we had a little more patience because we had a different expectation set for us by the generation that preceded us, our parents, our grandparents, right? But they did go through these events. They did just kind of have the rug pulled from them, right? From under them. And so they feel like we have to go and get it now. We have to see results more quickly because we don't know when things could change. They could change, we're going to school, getting ready for spring break, then we never go back from spring break and, to graduation and to prom and these things. So that could be a layer here and really addressing what their path is so they see that laid out in terms of what their earning potential is, what a timeline looks like for reaching those benchmarks of income that they're striving for. I think that would all be helpful coming in. Of course, from the employer side or even from the recruitment side of this, you have to have time and you have to set aside time to structure that, right? And that's a challenge from the employer side because, wheels are in motion, constantly. So that's something to look at from both sides of the coin.
For those Gen Zers that are listening, if you think that we're picking on you and you're the only ones that have ever had to deal with being judged like this, or for the employers that are listening that are thinking, why am I saddled with this gap that no one ever else had to deal with? I want to share with you a quote, and this is it. And here's the quote. Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners and contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders. They love to chatter instead of exercise. Children are now tyrants and not servants in their own household. And I read that and I looked who said it. That was a quote from Socrates over 2,000 years ago. And I realized there's probably always been oldsters versus youngsters and generations that change. This is just the current brand of this friction or integration. I think so. It's this is not a new problem, integrating, the next generation or the next workforce into the current workforce. I do think two things that do concern me is 98% disconnect. I don't think I've ever been aware. Our population has always absorbed that next generation into the workforce somehow with all its picadillos and differences. But a 98% disconnect between what most hiring managers want, that seems to be an extraordinarily large group, number one. And number two, we just have this explosion of AI as it's infiltrating business, which, let's be honest, guys, that's going to, if not already, eliminate a fair amount of entry-level jobs with the efficiencies that technology brings, which probably lowers the job opportunity pool even more so there. So I'd love to, I don't want to just be doom and gloom guy. I'd love to talk about, from my distinguished panel here, what are some things we might suggest for both employers and employees that we can do to sort of close this gap? And maybe we start first with how about employers? What can employers do to say, okay, there's no getting around, this is where our future is. How are we going to improve and make this workforce feel more welcome at our company? Jaynie, any thoughts? Anything what you're seeing?
I mean, I really like what EDPA Future Workforce has done with the mentorship programs. And I think we can add to that by really, even within an organization as an employer, exposing your newer employees to different aspects of the business so they do see those growth patterns. That's one of those things. And other avenues, should technology come in, and like you said, you don't want to be doom and gloom, are there other pathways for me to grow? because that's a real concern for Gen Z, having been through the pandemic and having experienced the things that Khalil mentioned. I think that helps to build their confidence and the security of their employment within the organization or within a specific industry, no matter what that may be, whether it's office, whether it's trade. I don't think that would really matter, but I think those would add layers of security, and let them see where they belong, because that is one of the things that they value, one of the top things they value.
Can that happen, Jaynie, remotely? Or do they need to be in person for that type of mentoring and gaining from that experience?
I'm going to draw from my own experience and context. That's what I have. I would just have to say that I think it could be a blend. I'm going to keep an open mind here. But I really feel that a lot of that would need to happen in person. Are there ways to connect remotely? Of course there are. Do we need to dig deeper to find those? Probably, but I still think that Gen Z values that interpersonal connection. And one of the things actually that attracts them to the event industry is that connection.
Yeah.
So, and face to face. So I think it's going to be a blend of getting them in and having that in-person, on-site experience built, then layering in the flexibility.
Khalil, you have experience with workforce talent all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Can Zoom and tools like that, where we're digitally face-to-face, close the gap on having to be in person for things like mentoring and being able to learn? I mean, is there enough technology available that you can minimize the physical absence of being together and still see a gain there?
Yeah, I mean, culture is not limited to in person. I will say there are things that happen in person, like specific jobs, like you can't swing a hammer over the internet,
Right.
So there's things that do have to be in person, but in person is not a replacement for core values and core behaviors that make up your culture.
Yeah.
Just because you're in person doesn't mean that you have culture like that. Like, you've got to be intentional, and you can be intentional. I mean, all of us are intentional with our family members. And a lot of times from remote, like Chris, you're in between two cities, you've got your daughter spread out.
Yep.
Like, you're able to connect with them regardless of where they are because of your, you've got FaceTime and iMessage and all those great tools there. Yeah. It's more about your characteristics as a person or as a company that matter. And I think that's, from my perspective, I don't know all things, but Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, boomer, whatever it is, right? Those are generations, and they're mainly classified, in my opinion, by their perspectives, by their worldview, how they see the world.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they all have the same personalities. They all have the same characteristics. They all have the same values and culture. Sure, there's going to be more overlap between someone who's Gen Z versus someone who's Gen X, but it's not blanket. And so at the end of the day, while you're maybe hiring Gen Z, there are great Gen Z people out there that have the characteristics and qualities you're looking for, the values that you and your team are looking for. And so you still just have to have a robust recruiting process, vetting process, and onboarding process to get those people into your culture, regardless of their age. So you have a worldview, but your experiences really shape who you become. And so as you're getting someone who's young, if you have an intentional culture and you have a great training program, onboarding program, mentoring, all those things, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, whether it's hybrid, doesn't matter. If you're intentional about those things, you can still shape a Gen Z person to be an incredible asset to you and your team.
Well, to your point, I live with two 20-something females. They prefer me to be more remote when we're talking now. I think that's a preference. But I remember, Khalil, we did an episode, God, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, but we had Noelle Webster from Worldview.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up.
And we talked about, she was the first person we had to help us unpack remote working. And is it legit? And is it, and she, man, did she hit me between the eyes with the point Jaynie was talking about culture. She said, one of the ways I love my company's culture, but one of the things that makes her feel connected is the number of people in their physical offices that call and check in with her regularly to see how she's doing, how she's working. Yeah. And again, I was like, well, are you really productive 8 hours a day? And there's a report out of England that says you're only productive 3.5 hours a day. And you realize, she's like, I'm so worried about being judged as not productive. I'm working 12 hours a day. I don't get off I have dinner at my desk and I don't get off emails till 10 o'clock at night. She goes, there's 10 days that'll go by and I don't go food shopping. I just need to, and I thought, and it's true, when you're hiring a good person, whether they're remote or in office, she said, I've got designers, right, who go, okay, I can come in and sit in the office, but my best workstations and software are on my desktop at home, and I can come in and be distracted by a bunch of people that want to ask me things, or I can just crank out the work uninterrupted. And I go, okay, well, I don't know what to say about that.
Well, that even plays even more into the point of it. It's not about the generation. She's a great employee, regardless of, she wants that. That's a characteristic, not a generational worldview. I think one last thing I'll say is flexibility does not need to be remote work necessarily. And I think a better way to frame it around flexibility is stop measuring your employees based on inputs and start measuring based on outcomes. If you do that and Gen Z's not meeting up to it, then that's fine. Judge them off of that. But if you're judging them off of the hours that they're in the office, you have a poor management system, is what I would say.
Way to bury the headline. That's a great point. So, Jaynie, how do you look for the Noel Websters? Like you're dead on. Those attributes of that person, that committed person, self-responsibility, totally willing to be accountable, a critical thinker, right, which is a problem solver. Is that possible to uncover in vetting and interviewing?
I actually do think it is, and I think it goes back to a topic you and I have discussed before, Chris. Really asking what that individual is looking for and understanding what they value and moving forward, what they're looking for to be successful in the workplace, what has made them successful.
Great point.
And if they are working remotely, how have they structured that to grow in their career to the point that they're at now? Or how are they planning to structure it if they're entering the professional workforce, right, in their early career? So, that is, you can absolutely uncover that in those conversations, because when you ask and listen, it's going to be shared with you. It's going to be uncovered.
That's a great point. I want to run through, so for the employers that are listening, we're talking about is Gen Z employable or unemployable? I think we know that they are. We're having an honest conversation about what we as employers might need to be able to do to create a better work environment so we can fully embrace and use that talent. So let me run through a list of these guys and you can weigh in on any of them. So number one, how about embracing technology if you haven't yet? Because we know this is a generation that loves and intuitively uses that. Offering clear, consistent feedback more regularly. I don't know that we're that great at that. I was telling Jaynie, I have a company full of doers. I don't have anybody dedicated to making sure their full-time job is the development of people and moving them along. You guys both said this, allow for hybrid and remote work options when possible. It's not every wrench turner or hammer swinger, but there is a lot of opportunity where that can be integrated. How about creating a digital knowledge base? Khalil, you've been on me about this forever. Create a digital knowledge base at your company so new hires can find answers independently, right? Much like searching Google. They'll help themselves. Are you giving them the tools? And we call it the playbook, right, Khalil? Like, if you think about every frequently asked question that a customer, or I would argue even an employee would ask, and you're documenting that, it might be quick little YouTube snippets, it's videos, it's whatever it is, but you have a library of that. Can they not grow and develop by that happening? I like EDPA's created a future leader style program. Can that be done at a company where you're recognizing and sort of honoring new employees or future leaders, encouraging mentorships? Basically, we're talking about helping them recognize the good feelings about why they chose your job. And I absolutely believe, and then I'll ask you guys to weigh in on this. I think you got to communicate. Here's what I'm hiring you for. Here's a career path option of the next 1 or 2 or even 3 jobs where you could take it. We can talk about what has to happen in terms of accomplishment to get there. And we can even talk about where the money can go from there. But maybe that's how you buy 3 years worth of interest instead of 13 months of interest, by making it really clear that they know what they're doing, how it's meaningful work and helping others. I think that's important, but where they can take that. And that might be a way that we can keep that group audience and that group tethered to us and interested.
Yeah.
Anything else I'm missing, you guys?
I would just say, Chris, if you're looking at Gen Z as an obstacle, you're not going to be in it for long. Workforce is aging out. You need the next generation. If you're looking at Gen Z as an opportunity, you're going to improve not only your business with talent, but you're going to improve it with, a better culture, with a better, org chart, better systems. Like, you'll be implementing new things, and you really need Gen Z to have a thriving business that's going to, be able to withstand the next 10, 20 years. So I'd rather embrace it now than grudgingly say, I guess we'll take them, but I'm worried that they're young.
Jaynie,
Like,
I'm seeing at Merge XP's next t-shirts to hand out. I am not an obstacle. I'm an opportunity. I love it. You will be flocked for the talent pool. Thank you. Somebody finally sees me. Anything you would add to that for employers to be thinking about, Jaynie?
I would also encourage that they not look at Gen Z as an obstacle. I mean, realistically, Gen Z is going to be 27%, something like that, 28% of the workforce by 2028.
Yeah.
Guys, we're knocking on the door of 2026.
Yeah.
So this is an important conversation.
One in four of the people walking through your door, this is who they are.
Yeah.
Great point.
Absolutely. But I think this is also, for us, an industry where Gen Z can thrive. There is the experiential aspect is exciting. It gives them something to look forward to grow towards. It is not, it's not monotonous, as we can all attest to. It is not monotonous. It's different every day, right?
It is.
And so just paving that roadway or that pathway for them so that they see it, it's clear, and having the structure is key. They're going to be an asset with those tools if we lay the foundation. And let's be real, every generation coming into the workforce has had someone to lay that foundation for them, regardless if it was educationally or an internship or, a training program through an organization. So it's just really this generation of employers paving that runway for a new generation. And I think that's
a great point. You reminded me, and the last word on the employer part, Jaynie had said, Chris, you should think about 3 levels of employees for the long-term health of your business. And so I know when you're hiring, we think we only go to find somebody when we need a doer right now. But some of the investment has to be investing in our future. And they can be contributors, right? They may not be the one that can handle the $3.5 million a year of your toughest customers all by themselves. But that doesn't mean they can't be on that team and supportive. How about, Jaynie, what would you offer or suggest to the the Gen Z employees coming in where they have an expectation. Any advice for them about how they get hired quicker or integrate into the culture that's existing before they have an opportunity to change it or influence it?
I would say that coming into the door, of course, understand the type of organization you're working or you're walking into, the type of work that is going to be expected of you. That's key, but also asking questions to understand if the organization aligns with your values or what your goals are professionally. Coming in the door is going to help you find that longer term match, because I really do feel that from the Gen Z side, it's not necessarily that they want to move every 9 to 15 months or what have you, moving frequently. They want a sense of belonging. However, maybe coming in that door, we think about some different questions to ask. We think about a different way to approach, how you are interviewing with that employer, I guess is what I would say.
And is it fair to say don't interview for job? Like, I get it. If you're going to be making widgets on a factory line and that doesn't seem like meaningful work where you're helping others, should you not apply for that job? Or if you go, no, I need the check and the job market is such that then what's the responsibility you have if you're going to take that job? In other words, do you have to, because the last thing I want is somebody taking a job while they're still looking. That just leaves everybody not feeling great. Right. So.
Right. And I would say try to avoid those situations. I think that's something that we're going to bump into regardless of generation, honestly, with that's economically dependent. I don't really think that is generationally dependent, honestly.
Khalil, is the younger workforce more apt to find work that they would be inspired to do with small business or startups even versus the big corporate structure, or is that not fair to say?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I mean, I'm mainly working with people in the trade, so it's it's a very special niche of people. But from the people that I've worked with, I think they're really just looking for the right opportunity that will allow them to advance quickly. They see the need to not be stuck at entry level. In fact, a lot of them try to skip that entry level. And there's companies out there. Palantir, I think, just said that they're no longer going to be hiring college graduates, which is a crazy thing to think about.
Wow.
But they're going after like the youngest talent, because if they can equip them with AI and they know that they're, quick to adopt technology, they're already using AI at a very high level, that they can do a lot of great things and advance very quickly and not have some of the, I don't know what you would call it, habits, I guess, of the, current working conditions or the college kids. So anyways, I think, I don't know that it's specific to corporate or small business. I think that's maybe based on the person or the location that someone's in and their experiences, but ultimately they want to be able to advance quickly.
Khalil, I was at a conference this summer and I was speaking with the business agent of a union in a major market in our industry. And he said he spent 2 years going to schools, high schools and both tech schools, talking to young people about the trade jobs. He said I was able to onboard 2 in 2 years. And he said, the general consensus was when I told him the job, do you want to work at the Super Bowl? Do you want to work at concerts? Do you want to work at, big events like the Bitcoin conference or CES show? He said, when I told them what the job was, they didn't want to work that hard. Is there a work ethic gap there? Or is that
again? I don't
general?
know that I want to categorize that as a generational issue.
But I also don't know that. I don't think they all realize you could make a 6-figure income, right, in that job, which I know a fair amount aren't really motivated.
Just to give you, it's 6 figures is a big deal. Yeah. But to watch somebody, and I've seen this happen not a dozen, but at least half a dozen times, where someone is coming out of a trade school where they spent 2 years, they spend 1 year in some sort of journeyman program or whatever it is, and they're making $150,000 base comp as in HVAC, in plumbing. Now they're working 60-hour weeks. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They are. It's not an easy schedule, but also they don't have any debt for student loans.
Right.
They're still living at home with mom and dad. They're making more than mom and dad combined sometimes, and they get overtime pay, and they get bonuses depending on if they're in a kind of a sales type of role where they can do upselling and whatever. So there are big opportunities out there for these roles.
Well, if you're financially motivated, a lot of times the hourly wage stuff with overtime and double time is an opportunity to feel instant gratification. Just to run through that list, that some of the feedback we got was, so consider startups or smaller businesses. You might find more meaningful work there. Consider expanding your outlook. Can you look at a 3-year time frame rather than just, if I'm not doing what I want in 6 months, I'm ready to leave. And ask the tough questions of the employer about, what does this job look like in 6 months or 12 months? Is there an opportunity for advancement if I work hard? Right? Put it in language where they will be honest and help you. How does the income move in that with that type of stuff? Jaynie, you talked about research that company, learn a little bit more about what it is and that you'll be doing. By the way, that drives you to ask better questions in the interview process, which very often impresses them and could lead to broader conversations about opportunities. So bottom line, by doing that, you're after aligning what your personal goals are with what the company's, pursuing or what they're needing. And a lot of times there's a fit there, and you can feel good about doing meaningful work. Me personally, if you can somehow embrace the idea that of some delayed gratification, I used to appreciate the fact that I may not be the highest paid person at this position, but I'm being exposed to really smart people. I'm learning an industry. I'm learning a craft. I sort of looked at the training and the education as part of the compensation, even though it wasn't presented that way. I knew I was learning things I could move on someday and either use for myself as a small business owner, or the next rung up the ladder somewhere. So, and the last word I think I saw was from Susie Welsh. She said, focus on the doing, not on what you can influence, not on what you can plan, not on what you manifest by positive thinking. Focus on the work you're doing and gaining enjoyment in what you're getting from that. And it's another great way to integrate in on what the current workforce is while it's learning to embrace you for all those wonderful qualities. Damn it, I'm not an obstacle. I'm an opportunity, right? I'm good at saying that. I want the T-shirt when you print those, Jaynie. We've covered a lot. I hope for me, what I got out of this conversation was, it's a different group, but Socrates taught us there's always disconnects between the old way and the new way. I think with talking with you two, I'm a little more sympathetic about the conditions Gen Z had to grow up with disrupted schools and work in education remotely, and AI now starting to nip away at some job opportunities. And by the way, your parents aren't off the hook either, because I think in some ways we've told you can do anything you want to do, and then we've handed you a lot of things more easily than the people on this call were handed it. So do we have some responsibility in, if we feel that there's not a bootstrap your way up and through it mindset? So, but I think the world is getting smaller. The opportunities, therefore, are larger if you're willing to travel and work anywhere. And our industry in particular is a great one. And we know there's a shortage. So what am I missing, guys? Anything?
Oh, I think that's great. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Jaynie.
Yeah, same here. Thank you guys for having me.
Jaynie, thanks for being our grown-up on the employer front. And we, again, as we were starting, I think we learned we could have used a tech-savvy youngster to help. But Khalil, thanks for accepting this as a topic, and I feel like
Yeah, no, it was great.
I think we'll have some good stuff here to slice and dice for our listeners. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys.
I'll see you guys soon.
Okay.
Thank
see
you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Experience Builders podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great content. Visit our website at crewxp.com to learn more about us. See you in the next one.